All right, here we go for 6 minutes. It's Monday. I'm going to try to explain a generation to you. A generation in the Bible is 40 years plus. Now, what you have to memorize or remember is generations overlap. You're born, and a lot of people by the age of 20 are married and birth their first child. So your generation goes 40 years, but you start the next generation in your 20s. Okay? So here's a chart. Let me try to explain it to you, all right? 0 to 40 is my generation, one generation. If I live to 80, that's the second generation, but my children in their generation started in my 20s. Actually, I waited late. I didn't have my first child till I was 30 years old, all right, and my second marriage. Now, point being, their generation, 40 years and onward, okay? Now, down here on the bottom, I'm on generation. Generation is 40 years plus. The reason I do the 40 years plus, a day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. And the Holy Spirit told me we're in the last hour of my time clock. I had an accountant figure out, let me look here real quick. Accountant figure out how long is an hour in God's time clock. It's 41.67 years on 1,000 years as a day. A day has 24 hours. It computes to 41.67. We can round the 6-7 up to 42. It's halfway past, all right? I don't know if that's algebra or whatever, math. So, 40 to 42. 40 to 42 is a generation. 40 to 42 is the last hour of God's time clock. I've got something to do for the Lord at 80. I'm 77. Alexis just got married, who is my daughter's child, birthed when she was a teenager or 20 years old. Now Alexis is 20 years old. Her child, that generation, I'm 77, the last generation, the last hour of the time clock, we could be halfway through the 40 years, leaving 20 more years. So if I lived at 87 or 97, I'm going to see a major event in God's last hour of his time clock, which is Alexis's child, and begins its generation when Alexis is 20 years old. I'm a grandfather to Alexis, a father to my youngest child, grandfather, Alexis' child right here. I'll be a great-grandfather sometime in the next 2 years before 80 years old. But we're in the last hour of God's time clock. 3 minutes and 40-some seconds. A generation is 40 years. Generations overlap. The next generation starts 20 years into my generation, and they just keep overlapping every 20 years, even though a full generation of my generation is 40 years. Okay? So as we live to 80 or 100, we can become a great-grandfather or a great-great-grandfather and see the fourth or fifth, the beginning of the fourth or the fifth generation from my generation. 40 plus years a generation. We're in the last hour of God's time clock, which is 41.67, but we could be 20 years into that 40 years. I'm 77, got something to do for the Lord at 80. Moses and Caleb, empowered by the Holy Spirit, began their ministries and did things for the Lord at 80 years old plus. Moses lived till 120. That is 5 minutes on the time clock. We're going to end the teaching on generations, and we're in the last hour of God's time clock. We could be in the last half or the last quarter, the last 20 years or the last 10 years before a major event. I'm prophesying. Have a great day. Bye.